The room was quiet except for the slow rhythm of a heart monitor and the soft hum of an oxygen machine. A boy no older than 12 lay on the bed, thin and pale, his small frame almost swallowed by the white hospital sheets. His name was Ethan Miller, and the doctors had done all they could, but Ethan still smiled. On the wall across from him, taped just above the flickering TV, was a movie poster, John Wick. Every day he'd look at it, whispering to himself, "One day I'll meet him. I'll meet Keanu Reeves." His mother, Sarah, would stroke his hair and smile, trying to hold back tears. "Why Keanu, sweetheart?" she'd ask. Ethan's voice was soft but steady. "Because he never gives up. Even when he loses everything, he still fights for what's right. He reminds me to be strong too." It was the middle of spring. Outside the window, cherry blossoms swayed in the wind and the world moved on. But inside that small hospital room, time felt frozen. Nurses walked in and out, always greeted by Ethan's bright "hi" and a thumbs up. His spirit was untouched by the disease eating away at him. One afternoon, a young nurse named Claire noticed the boy's poster and his quiet admiration. She sat by his bed and asked, "If you could tell Keanu one thing, what would you say?" Ethan thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I'd tell him thank you for making me brave." Claire's heart ached. That night, as she drove home, she couldn't shake Ethan's words. She decided to do something small, something maybe impossible. She went online and wrote a simple post. "There's a brave 12-year-old boy named Ethan fighting cancer. His last wish is to meet Keanu Reeves. If anyone out there knows how to make that happen, please help." She attached a photo. Ethan smiling beside his John Wick poster, eyes full of life. By morning, the post had a few dozen shares. By noon, hundreds. By the next day, it had reached thousands. And somewhere, beyond all the noise of fame and schedules, that story, that wish, was about to reach a man whose heart had always been bigger than his fame. What happened next would restore everyone's faith in humanity. By the second morning, Ethan's story had reached every corner of the internet. Thousands of comments poured in, strangers offering prayers, tagging fan pages, and sharing clips of Keanu Reeves' kind gestures over the years. The world had seen celebrities before, but this time it felt different. People weren't chasing fame. They were chasing hope for one boy and one miracle. Inside the hospital, Ethan's room was brighter now. Flowers arrived daily. Letters from people he'd never met lined the windowsill. His mother would read them aloud. Messages from Canada, Brazil, the Philippines, Japan, all wishing him strength. But Ethan still asked the same quiet question each day. "Do you think he saw it yet, Mom?" Sarah would smile softly. "Maybe, sweetheart. Maybe he did." Across the country, in a modest home filled with books and motorcycle helmets, Keanu Reeves sat at his kitchen table, scrolling through his phone after a long day on set. He wasn't a man who lived online. Fame had never defined him. But something caught his eye, a post, a headline. "Dying boy's final wish to meet Keanu Reeves." He opened it. There it was, in a picture of a thin boy with a bright smile holding a John Wick poster. The caption under it read, "He says Keanu gives him strength." Keanu stared at the screen for a long moment. He read every word of the nurse's message, every comment from strangers sending love. Then he exhaled slowly, eyes glassy. He didn't call his manager. He didn't call his PR team. Instead, he picked up his personal phone and made one quiet call to the hospital. "Hi," he said softly. "This is Keanu Reeves. I read about a boy named Ethan. Could you tell him I'd like to visit?" The nurse on the other end froze, thinking it was a prank. But when she heard that calm, familiar voice, she nearly dropped the phone. Within hours, the hospital staff began preparing Ethan's room. Not for cameras, not for a public stunt, but for something real. Meanwhile, Ethan's post continued to soar online. News outlets started covering it, calling it the wish heard around the world. And yet, no one knew that Keanu was already on his way. He arrived the next morning in a simple black hoodie and jeans, with no fanfare, no entourage, and just humility. As he stepped into the hospital lobby, a hush fell over the staff. This wasn't a celebrity visit. This was a man answering a whisper from a little boy's heart. If you could meet one person before you leave this world, who would it be? Tell us in the comments below, and let us know where you're watching from. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, painting soft stripes across the floor. Ethan was half asleep when the door opened quietly. His mother turned, expecting a nurse, but froze. Standing there, holding a small bouquet of white lilies, was Keanu Reeves. No cameras. No reporters. Just him. For a moment, time stopped. The tired hum of the machine seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of a small gasp. Ethan's eyes fluttered open, and when he saw who it was, his weak smile grew wide enough to light up the whole room. "Hey, champ," Keanu said softly, kneeling beside the bed. "I heard you're the real fighter around here." Ethan blinked, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. You came?" Keanu nodded, setting the flowers beside him. "Of course I did. You asked to meet me, right? I couldn't say no to that." Sarah covered her mouth, unable to speak. Claire, the nurse who had started it all, stood silently in the doorway, her eyes wet. Keanu sat down beside Ethan's bed. Not at a distance, not like a star, but like an old friend. He took the boy's small hand in his and smiled. "You know, I saw that picture of you with my poster. That was pretty cool." Ethan laughed softly, the sound frail but full of joy. "You're my hero," he whispered. Keanu's eyes softened. "No, buddy. You're my hero. You're the one who's fighting every day. I just make movies." They talked for nearly an hour, about motorcycles, movie stunts, favorite foods, and life. Ethan asked how many times Keanu had fallen doing action scenes, and Keanu chuckled. "Too many to count. But the trick is, you always get back up." Sarah stood by the window, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son smile, a smile she hadn't seen in months. Before leaving, Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, a silver coin prop from John Wick. He placed it in Ethan's palm. "That's the coin we use in the movies. It's a symbol of trust and loyalty. I want you to have it." Ethan held it tightly as if it were the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," he whispered. Keanu leaned closer. "Promise me something, okay? You keep being strong, and no matter what happens, remember, bravery isn't about fighting battles. It's about facing life with heart." Ethan nodded, his little hand trembling in Keanu's. The actor smiled, stood up slowly, and looked at Sarah. "You've raised one incredible son," he said softly. As he walked toward the door, Ethan's voice called out faintly behind him. "Mr. Reeves?" Keanu turned. "Can we take a picture? Just for me to remember?" Keanu smiled, came back, sat beside him again, and gently put his arm around the boy. Claire took the photo, one frame that would soon touch the entire world. And just before leaving, Keanu whispered something to Ethan that only the boy could hear. Whatever he said made Ethan smile through his tears. That day, everyone in that hospital knew they had witnessed something rare, a moment of pure humanity. If you were in Keanu's place, would you have done the same? Or do you think celebrities owe fans this kind of love? Share your thoughts in the comments. The sun had begun to dip beyond the hospital windows, filling the room with a warm golden glow. It had been hours since Keanu arrived, yet no one wanted the moment to end. Ethan was still talking, his frail voice soft but filled with excitement. He asked questions about filming John Wick, about how the fight scenes worked, about whether Keanu ever got scared. The actor listened intently, answering each question with patience and gentle humor. He didn't rush. He didn't check his phone. He was simply there. For the first time in months, Ethan wasn't just a patient. He was a boy again, laughing, curious, alive. Eventually, silence settled between them. Keanu could see Ethan's energy fading. The color drained from his cheeks. The machine's soft beeps filled the room again. Sarah quietly wiped her eyes, knowing that her son's body was tired even though his heart still wanted to keep talking. Ethan looked up at Keanu and whispered, "Can I ask you one more thing?" Keanu leaned closer. "Of course, champ, anything." Ethan swallowed, his voice trembling. "Can you promise me something?" Keanu nodded. "What is it?" The boy hesitated, then said, "Promise me. You'll keep fighting for good people, like in your movies, people who can't fight for themselves." Keanu felt his throat tighten. He looked into the boy's eyes filled with more courage than most men twice his age. Slowly, he squeezed Ethan's hand. "I promise," he said softly. "I'll keep fighting. For people like you. You've got my word." A faint smile spread across Ethan's lips. "Good," he whispered, closing his eyes for a moment as if the promise itself had given him peace. Keanu stood and walked toward the John Wick poster taped to the wall. He stared at it for a moment, then took out a pen from his pocket and wrote something across the bottom corner. His handwriting was small but clear. "You taught me what real strength means. Keanu." When Ethan opened his eyes again, Keanu pointed to the words and smiled. "That's for you." Ethan looked at it, then at him. His lips trembled. "I'm gonna keep that forever." Sarah broke down silently, pressing her hand to her mouth as tears rolled down her cheeks. She whispered, "Thank you. Thank you for doing this." Keanu turned to her, his voice quiet and kind. "No, ma'am. Thank you for raising a real hero." He reached out and gently placed a hand on Ethan's head. "You keep resting now, buddy. You've done more than enough fighting for one lifetime." The boy nodded, eyes heavy. "Will you come back?" Keanu smiled faintly. "You'll see me again, I promise." It wasn't a movie line, it was something deeper. A truth between two souls who'd met at the crossroads of life and love. As Keanu prepared to leave, he turned one last time at the door. Ethan's small hand waved weakly from the bed. Keanu placed a hand over his heart and nodded. A silent salute between a hero on screen and a real one in life. Outside, the hallway was quiet. The nurse Claire stood there holding back tears. "You made him so happy," she whispered. Keanu paused, his voice breaking slightly. "No, he made me better." He left the hospital without saying another word, the weight of that promise resting on his heart. Inside the room, Ethan drifted off to sleep, peaceful, smiling, clutching that silver coin tight in his hand. Engagement line. If you could ask your hero for one promise before you go, what would it be? Share it in the comments. Your words might touch someone's heart today. The hospital room felt emptier than usual. 2 days had passed since Keanu's visit, and though the wall still held his handwritten message, the air was quieter now. Ethan had slept more, talked less. The nurses moved softly around him, careful not to disturb the stillness. His mother, Sarah, sat by his side, holding his small hand, whispering words of love. "I'm right here, baby. You're not alone." Outside, the spring breeze brushed through the open window, carrying with it the faint scent of cherry blossoms, the same kind that had danced outside when Ethan first made his wish. Ethan opened his eyes weakly and whispered, "Mom." "I'm tired," Sarah smiled through her tears. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can rest now." He turned his head slightly toward the John Wick poster across the room. His gaze lingered on the words Keanu had written. "You taught me what real strength means." His lips curled into the faintest smile. And then, with one last breath, Ethan's small hand went still in his mother's grasp. Sarah pressed his hand to her face, sobbing quietly. Outside, the cherry blossoms continued to fall, silent, gentle, endless. 2 days later, word reached Keanu on a movie set in Los Angeles. He had just finished a take when his assistant approached, face pale. "Keanu, it's about Ethan." The actor didn't speak for a long time. He just stared at the floor, eyes distant. Then without a word, he walked away from the cameras, through the soundstage doors, and disappeared into the city. Hours later, no one knew where he went. His team called, producers waited, but Keanu didn't answer. The next morning, in a quiet suburban cemetery hundreds of miles away, a man in a dark suit stood silently near a small white coffin. He kept his distance, blending into the crowd of grieving relatives. It was Keanu. No red carpet. No press, no attention. Just him, hands folded, eyes lowered. Sarah saw him and froze. She hadn't expected it, hadn't been told he'd come. He looked up, nodded gently, and walked toward her. "I'm so sorry," he said softly, his voice trembling. She couldn't speak. She just hugged him, crying into his shoulder. And for a long moment, Keanu held her. No words, just shared grief. When the service ended, Keanu walked over to the small gravestone. He knelt down, reached into his pocket, and placed something on the grass on the silver John Wick coin. He whispered, "You kept your promise, champ. Now it's my turn." The wind stirred the blossoms again, scattering them across the grave like pink snow. Before leaving, Keanu pulled out a small note card and tucked it beneath the flowers. On it, written in his calm, uneven handwriting, were the words, "The world is brighter because you were here. Rest easy, little warrior." He stood there for a moment longer. then quietly walked away, never once looking back. Later that evening, as the sun set over the hills, a photo appeared online, not taken by media but by a local passerby. It showed Keanu standing alone near a child's grave, his head bowed, a single flower in his hand. People shared it again and again, not for fame, but because in that moment, they saw what true kindness looked like. He had kept his promise. Have you ever lost someone who inspired you deeply? Comment their name below it. Let's remember them together. A few weeks had passed since the funeral. The blossoms had long fallen and the small cemetery was now silent, only the wind whispering through the trees. But for Sarah, time had stopped the moment Ethan took his last breath. She still came to his room every morning, straightening the bed sheets, touching the faded John Wick poster with trembling fingers. The ink of Keanu's handwritten message, "You taught me what real strength means," had slightly smudged from her tears, but she couldn't bring herself to clean it. One afternoon, as Sarah sat alone in the kitchen, sorting through hospital bills and sympathy cards, there was a knock on the door. She opened it to find a delivery man holding a brown package. "Delivery for Sarah Miller," he said with a kind smile. She frowned. "Who's it from?" He checked his clipboard. "No name, ma'am. Just says, from someone who remembers Ethan." Her hands shook as she signed the paper and brought the box inside. She placed it gently on the table and stared at it for a long time before slowly cutting it open. Inside, wrapped carefully in tissue paper, was a black leather jacket. The same kind Keanu wore in John Wick. Folded on top of it was a sealed white envelope with a familiar signature, KR. With tears already forming, she opened the letter. The handwriting was simple, heartfelt. "Dear Sarah, I wanted you to have this. It was the jacket I wore in the second film. Ethan told me he liked that one the most. He reminded me that strength isn't about what we can fight, but what we can love through. He changed the way I see courage. In his name, I've made a small donation to the Children's Hospital, to help kids like him who keep the world braver than we deserve. Heroes aren't on screens. They're in hearts that never stop believing. With all my love and respect." Keanu. By the time she reached the end, Sarah's tears had soaked the page. She pressed the letter to her heart, sobbing quietly. The jacket still smelled faintly of leather and cologne, as if Keanu had just worn it. At the bottom of the box was another envelope, smaller, addressed simply, "For the hospital." Inside was a check, a staggering donation in Ethan's name, enough to fund a new wing for pediatric care. When the hospital staff opened it, they wept. A small plaque was later placed on the wall near the children's ward. It read, "Ethan's Corner, where courage lives." Word began to spread again, first among hospital workers, then online. Someone posted the letter with Sarah's permission, and within hours it went viral. Across the world, millions read Keanu's words. Hashtags trended: Ethan the Brave, Keanu Kindness, Heroes Have Hearts. News outlets ran headlines: Keanu Reeves honors dying boy with unforgettable gift. Hollywood star funds hospital in memory of young fan. But Keanu stayed silent. He didn't speak to the press, didn't make a statement, didn't take credit. When asked by a reporter weeks later if the story was true, he only smiled and said softly, "He was a special kid." Then he walked away. For Sarah, the world's attention didn't matter. What mattered was the jacket hanging on Ethan's chair, the letter framed beside his poster, and the quiet knowledge that her son had touched the heart of a man who touched millions. Every night, before bed, she'd whisper toward the window, "He kept his promise, baby." He really did. And somewhere, perhaps in spirit, Ethan smiled, because he knew his hero hadn't just fought on screen. He'd fought for him too. Do you think Keanu deserves the title of the kindest man in Hollywood? Type yes if you agree, and share this story to spread his message of love. The story spread faster than anyone could have imagined. By the end of the week, Ethan Miller was no longer just a name. He was a symbol of bravery, innocence, and the kind of strength the world had almost forgotten. News outlets replayed the photo of Keanu sitting beside Ethan's hospital bed, holding his small hand, both smiling softly. The image was everywhere. On timelines, television screens, even billboards. A moment of pure kindness frozen in time. Yet what touched people most wasn't fame, or the donation, or the headlines. It was the quietness of it all. How Keanu never spoke publicly about what he did, how he refused interviews, and how he let the story belong entirely to the boy. In the days that followed, Sarah began receiving messages from across the world. A single mother from India wrote, "Your son gave me strength to fight my son's illness. Thank you, Ethan." A teacher from Brazil shared, "I told my students about Ethan and Keanu. Now they've started a kindness club at school." And one message, from a child in the Philippines, simply read, "I want to be brave like Ethan." Sarah would read each one out loud at night, her tears falling softly, not out of grief but gratitude. Her little boy's story was changing lives. Meanwhile, online communities began raising funds under the hashtag #EthanTheBrave, collecting donations for children's hospitals worldwide. Actors, athletes, and even ordinary citizens joined in, all inspired by one boy's wish and one man's heart. A video tribute surfaced days later, clips of Keanu's movies cut together with real photos of Ethan. It was called "Be Kind, Be Brave." The ending read, "Dedicated to Ethan Miller, a real-life hero who taught the world that courage is contagious." It reached millions within 24 hours. Keanu watched it quietly from his apartment one night. There were no lights on, just the glow of the laptop screen and the reflection of Ethan's smile shining back at him. When the video ended, he whispered the words he had written in his letter. "Heroes aren't on screens. They're in hearts that never stop believing." He closed the laptop, sat back, and stared out at the city lights. Somewhere in those flickering streets, he felt that Ethan's light was still there, small but unending. Months later, Keanu returned to the hospital unannounced. He walked the same hallways carrying boxes of toys and books. No cameras, no press, just him. At the end of the corridor, a small plaque caught his eye. "Ethan's Corner, where courage lives." He stood there for a while, smiling to himself. Then he turned to the nurse on duty, Claire, the same woman who had made the first post. "You did something beautiful," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, he did." Keanu chuckled, his eyes glistening. "Yeah, he really did." Before leaving, he placed a small coin, another John Wick prop, in under the plaque, just like the one he had given Ethan. It was his way of saying the promise lives on. As months turned into years, the story of Ethan and Keanu never faded. It became a modern legend, not of Hollywood or heroism, but of humanity. Talk shows, schools, and even motivational speakers referenced it when they spoke about kindness. People used Ethan's name as a reminder to be gentle, to listen, to care. And every time someone shared the story, they didn't just remember a dying boy or a famous actor. They remembered what it means to be human. The world will always remember that moment. The day a man known for action movies showed that the greatest strength isn't in fighting villains. It's in showing love, and somewhere beyond the stars, maybe Ethan is still smiling, proud that his hero kept his promise, and that his story kept the world believing. If you believe that small acts of kindness can change the world, type humanity in the comments. And never forget, real heroes have the gentlest hearts.